But in marriage, I think that's it. If we have the Stanley Cup of our marriage being a thriving, living marriage that is a blessing to this world and to our family, to our children, that is an apologetic for the kingdom of God, then we're going to do what it takes. We're going to shift our roles maybe a little bit. We're going to talk about what our Stanley Cup is for our marriage. And we'll have that humility to come alongside and come on the other side of the table, not see our teammate as the problem, but how can we as teammates go towards that prize?
Do you find yourself wondering if this is all marriage has to offer? Are you so busy and exhausted at the end of the day that your marriage is the last thing you have energy to think about?
If you're wondering if God has more for your marriage, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Living Marriages Podcast. My name is Aaron, pastor and marriage coach.
And I'm April, spiritual director and marriage coach. Join us as we explore simple habits for building intimacy with your spouse while learning what it means to center your marriage on Christ. Welcome to the Living Marriages Podcast. Thanks for listening with us today. We invite you, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, to take a moment to hit that like or subscribe button. And if you have been impacted, we would love to hear from you through a review, if you want to write us a review on the platform that you're listening on as well. If you'd like, we have a website as well. You can check that out at livingmarriages.com. And you can see what the options are for supporting our nonprofit ministry there.
Well, this topic is an interesting one. It really felt simple when we were talking about it and planning this episode out, and yet I think it's also quite profound. We're going to talk today about one mindset shift for greater unity in your marriage. And the seed was planted, I think, for you and me, April, when we were chatting with Katie Skurja way back in episode 8. That feels like a lifetime ago. Mm-hmm. And she said something in that episode, that wide-ranging conversation was incredible. But one thing she said, and it was almost something she just mentioned in passing, she said something to the effect that it's really important that we remember we're on the same team. Mm-hmm. And that little comment has stuck with me ever since, because I've started reflecting on our marriage and my own attitude and mindset in marriage, our marriage. And at times I've thought, why do I feel like I'm on the opposite team from you, April? Why am I assuming the worst about you? Why am I feeling agitated by things instead of finding a way together forward? I'm feeling almost like I'm fighting against you in this.
Mm-hmm. And it's so easy in our closest relationships to be the least kind and the least accepting and patient. And so it's only natural. We've been married for almost 14 years. Mm-hmm. It happens, right? Where we start thinking, oh, well, he never does this, or she always does that. Mm-hmm. And we start associating maybe the problems or the struggles that we're having in marriage with the person that we're married to. Mm-hmm. It's because it's you. Right. You're doing this. You're saying this, and I can't stand that. Right. And what we're saying here is that, yes, there might be things that you need to deal with, but if you start putting that on your spouse, then you're forgetting that you started this marriage together and that you started walking down the road of this marriage together, and that you need to keep walking together.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. I remember sharing on this podcast a little while ago when you were sick for a while and fighting a cold that had dragged on for 6 weeks or something. Mm-hmm. And I remember confessing to our podcast audience that I was annoyed, and I was annoyed with you, not with the sickness necessarily, but with you. And I was even in sharing that confession now, it's silly. But in that moment, I think all of the frustrations that I was feeling, it's been a work trying to get this Living Marriages podcast off the ground. There've been times of uncertainty. There's been times of challenge. We face that in our own marriage with the transitions we've been going through as a family, moving, changing careers, all these things. And it was so easy, I think, for myself, bottle up those frustrations and that anxiety and that uncertainty. And like you said, then just project it on the person who's closest to me. And so I'm sorry, but it was there, and I'll be honest. But God has been doing a work, and I'll speak for myself, especially in this, where I've noticed within the last month or so, especially as been reflecting on what Katie said in that episode, and this idea that, wait a second, we are on the same team. And I would say we have a good marriage, April. And I still struggled with that, that sense of being on the same team. And so I'm wondering, and I probably wouldn't be far off to say, for you, our listeners, you've struggled with this as well at some point, where we feel like we're actually, the other person is the problem rather than facing a problem together. And Dr. Becky Kennedy, we've quoted her before. We've been going back to her parenting resources through the Good Inside book, but also her community and app, trying to gain some tools as parents. But we've also found it to be really helpful for marriage.
Relationship is relationship.
Amen. And one image she uses, it's a parenting image, but it also made perfect sense for marriage, was how often are we approaching problems and, in a sense, sitting across the table from each other, looking at each other as the problem, looking at the other person as the problem. And what would happen if we didn't see the other person as the problem, but we're able to actually instead come to the other side of the table, come alongside, and together look at the problem, together find a way through that problem, together share a vision for how we're going to make it through.
And as you're saying that, another thing that I was just even reading it this morning and was reminded, in order to come alongside someone, you need to be able, that's connecting, right? You need to be able to connect with your spouse, to be able to, in a humble and willing to learn kind of way, like we've talked about before, actually listening and asking questions to understand. Because if you don't understand what the problem is together, and you might think that you have completely different problems, but maybe it comes down to actually being the same thing. And once you've actually spent the time to connect with each other and sit on the same side of the table, then you'll start to be able to hopefully see what the actual disconnection or problem is.
What would that look like practically then, April? Because we've started trying to practice this with our kids, connecting before approaching a problem together. Do you want to give our listeners a...
Yeah. For example, I had this example that I told Aaron this morning. It's like, say you come home from work and I've had a long day with the kids. I'm making supper and the garbage needs to be taken out. I could easily say, you forgot to take the garbage out this morning. I really need this space here. Can you please take it out?
Yeah.
Right? That would be, the problem is you. You didn't take the garbage out. This needs to be done.
Yeah.
But what if I were to instead approach it differently and say, hey, welcome home. It's great to see you. I hope you had a good day. Would you mind? I know that it's been a long day, but it would be really helpful for me if you could take the garbage out while I finish making supper. Does that feel different, Aaron?
World's different. Well, and again, it's that whole idea of connecting, and it's that whole idea of we're approaching this together. And we've acknowledged with each other and the fact that, we both had long days at work with the kids. we have this common goal now
Mm-hmm.
of let's get supper on the table so we can enjoy some time together as a family. And this garbage is in the way to that goal. How can we approach that together? How can I take that on while you're also working towards that goal of getting supper on the table so our family can enjoy that time together?
So figuring out what our common goal is together and how we can both contribute to that being a success.
And that whole it might take a little bit more effort, might take a little more time, took more words. And sometimes I think the problem is we just feel so entitled to snap at the other and say, well, you've been gone working all day with your friends and your colleagues and I'm stuck at home with, or, it's easy to do that. And sometimes we feel like we just need to snap at the other for validating ourselves. But so we have to lay that down is partly what I'm hearing. Embrace that
entitlement. We need to lay down the entitlement.
Yes.
Of I deserve this. Woe is me. I've been doing this and who knows what you've been up to, but I deserve this.
Right. Wow. So laying down that entitlement, coming and connecting, starting with that place of connection again, and then seeing the problem together and working towards a solution together. And it's, when I break it down like that, it sounds really complex, but in that example you gave us, it was very simple.
And as we're talking about that, Emily, it's connection. It reaches to the heart, right? So we're connecting heart to heart before we start going to the head stuff of like, this needs to be done and that needs to be done. Yeah. Let's connect at the heart level first. And remember, again, as we were talking about today, that we are on the same team before we tackle the problem or try to reach the goal that we have together.
Yeah. So we want to refer you, our listeners, back to a few episodes where you might find some tools and some space to even imagine together some of these things we've been talking about. If you go back to episode 22, we talk about doing the small things often for connection. What are the simple, small ways that we can connect with one another throughout the day, using some of the Gottman principles of bidding and receiving those bids? I think if we build those connecting points in throughout the day in small, simple ways, then when the stress is there, we'll still have those tools and resources and mindset to be able to still connect and face the problem together. Episode 14 talks about what a kingdom marriage is and taking some time to vision that together. Where are we heading in our marriage? What are we growing towards? Because we heard all the way back in episode 1, if your marriage isn't growing, it's dying. And just a recent episode 32, talks about, we talked with our friends Ron and Amanda Falk about why they are continuing to receive counseling when their marriage is not in crisis. Far from it, they're actually thriving in their marriage, and yet they still are going to counseling, and some insight there as to why that might be a good resource as well.
And we will remind you that this is not about being exactly the same as your spouse.
No.
Having a common goal doesn't mean that we're going with the team analogy. We're into hockey right now with playoffs. And it doesn't mean that you're both going to be forwards and you're both going to be, we got to score goals. Yeah. You're going to be different. One of you might have one viewpoint on the issue and the other one might have a different viewpoint. You might have slightly different approaches, but the goal is to find that commonality and unity in what you're doing together as a team.
Yeah. For those of you who aren't aware, we are in Oilers country, Edmonton, and we are getting deeper into the playoffs again. But it's been fascinating to watch this team. If you'll bear with the sports analogy for a moment, dear listeners, where the Oilers got so close to that ultimate prize last year of the Stanley Cup, and they were one goal shy, one game shy. And so it's been fascinating to watch this team make a run towards that ultimate goal again, that ultimate prize again. And it's been really interesting to watch how people have come around that goal and have humbled themselves in some ways to say, for the sake of the team, I will embrace a slightly different role. I will do something different so that we can still reach our goal together. And it's taken some humility. It's taken some change and adjustment. One of the Oilers superstars, Leon Draisaitl, one of the top 3 players in the world, you could argue, for his offensive output. He is a goal scorer. He's incredible. Took on a defensive role when he was asked to by his coach in the second round of the playoffs. He was sent out against the other team's best players, shut them down, didn't score a goal, and yet there was pride in that. There was a sense of, wow, look at how I can contribute to my team in a different way, with the ultimate goal of, hey, this is where we're going. And sorry if you're not a sports fan, hopefully that analogy still works for you. But in marriage, I think that's it. If we have the Stanley Cup of our marriage being a thriving, living marriage that is a blessing to this world and to our family, to our children, that is an apologetic for the kingdom of God, then we're going to do what it takes. We're going to shift our roles maybe a little bit. We're going to talk about what our Stanley Cup is for our marriage. And we'll have that humility to come alongside and come on the other side of the table, not see our teammate as the problem, but how can we as teammates go towards that prize?
So thanks for joining us today. I want to challenge you or encourage you today to think of one way that you can make a heart connection with your spouse. So when they get home from work or whatever's going on today, the next time you see each other, to think about maybe where they've been, what's been going on in their day, and how you can connect with them and acknowledge what they've been up to before you ask for something or before you say anything else. Make that heart connection in some way so that you can work towards working as a team.
And that goes for both partners. Saying that whether you've been at home with the kids all day or you've been at work all day, both of us need to put that effort in to connect, because it is a team effort. So join us on the Thursday Thought as we'll have more reflections on this and prayer around this. And until next time, God bless.
Thank you for the privilege of journeying with you today as we seek God's best for our marriages.
Before you go, if you've been blessed, challenged, or inspired by what you've heard today, please bless us by hitting the follow button, leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and sharing this podcast with family and friends.
You can also support this nonprofit podcast by making a charitable donation at our website, livingmarriages.com.
Until next time, praying the life, intimacy, and connection of God's love over you and your marriage.